When I stood on the porch that sweltering Texas afternoon, my hands trembling around the chipped mug of iced tea, I never imagined the door would close on me, not just the wooden one, but the invisible gate that kept me out from the hearts of my own family. My name is May, and I want to tell you how I ended up standing alone, in the heat, watching a life I thought was mine slip quietly away. I was once the glue that held us together, the mother who made every birthday cake, the grandmother who sang lullabies under the wide Texas sky. For years I was the one who took in stray cats, baked pies for school fundraisers, and mended torn hearts with quiet words and open arms. But that day when I needed those arms most, they were nowhere to be found. My family had always been my world, my children, my grandchildren, the laughter and chaos of a house full of love. We were close once, bound by Sunday dinners and shared stories that stretched long into the night. But time, pride, and misunderstandings had frayed those bonds until all that remained was a threadbare fabric of what used to be. I had lived modestly, tucked away in a small, weathered house on the edge of town. The mortgage was paid, but just barely, and the savings rested in a jar I barely dared open. My income came from a patchwork of odd jobs, house cleaning, gardening, babysitting, and the occasional check from Social Security. It was enough to keep the lights on and the garden growing, but not much more. When the storms gathered, health scares, a leaking roof, and the creeping shadow of loneliness, I turned to the people I trusted most. I knocked on their doors, hoping for a hand to hold, a place to rest. But one by one their doors closed, their voices grew distant, their hearts hardened. The family I had nurtured, the family I loved, turned away. I remember the moment my youngest daughter told me she couldn't help, that she had her own life now. Her words were gentle but firm, like the Texas sun beating down on dry earth. May, you've always been strong. You'll find a way. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was the truth I had to face. Sitting alone that evening, I felt the sting of rejection settle deep, like the dust that gathers in forgotten corners. But beneath the ache, a quiet fire sparked. I was more than the sum of my struggles, more than the woman who needed help. I was May, the mother who had raised 3 children on her own, the grandmother who had taught her grandchildren to dream. And I wasn't done yet. I began to look at my life differently, not as a series of burdens, but as a collection of strengths hidden beneath the surface. The garden I tended became my sanctuary, each bloom a small victory against the odds. The odd jobs, once tiring, became opportunities to meet new faces, hear new stories, and remind myself I was still part of this world. I kept a notebook, writing down every dollar earned and every bill paid. It was a small act of rebellion against the chaos, a way to reclaim control. I learned to stretch a dollar farther than I thought possible, finding deals at thrift stores and making meals from scraps. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The hardest part wasn't the money or the loneliness. It was the silence from my family. No calls, no visits, no invitations. It was as if I had become invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. My heart ached for the laughter we once shared, for the warmth of their presence. But I refused to let that pain consume me. Instead, I focused on the quiet moments, the early morning light filtering through the curtains, the hum of bees in the garden, the feel of soil between my fingers. These small joys became my lifeline, reminding me that life could still be beautiful, even when broken. I thought often of the days when the house was full of noise and love, when I was the center of that world. I wondered where it had gone wrong, what invisible line had been crossed to turn love into distance. But I didn't dwell on blame. Instead, I chose to believe that we were all flawed, all capable of both hurt and healing. Sometimes, when the nights grew cold and the silence too loud, I would light a candle and whisper a prayer. Not for rescue, but for strength. Strength to keep going, strength to forgive, strength to rebuild. I didn't know then what that rebuilding would look like, but I knew it had to start somewhere. My neighbors noticed the change in me, the way I carried myself a little straighter, the quiet determination in my eyes. Mrs. Harper, who lived 2 houses down, stopped by with a pie and a smile one afternoon. "May," she said softly, "don't let them make you feel less than you are. You're worth more than you know." Her words settled over me like a cool breeze. I realized I had been shrinking to fit into the space they left me, but now I wanted to grow. I wanted to fill the emptiness with something new, something strong and unbreakable. That night I sat by the window, watching the stars blink awake in the vast Texas sky. I thought about the family I had lost, or rather, the family that had lost me. I thought about the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. And I made a quiet promise to myself. I would find a way forward, not waiting for help, but creating it. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for certain: I was not finished. Not yet. There was more life inside me than these years had shown. And I was ready to prove it, one small step at a time. So here I stand, May from Texas, a woman once turned away but not broken. The road ahead is uncertain, but it is mine to walk. And as I take that first step, I want to ask you, have you ever felt invisible to those you love? Have you ever had to find strength where none seemed left? If so, then perhaps you will understand why I refuse to give up, why I hold tight to hope like a lifeline in the storm. Because sometimes the hardest part of losing everything is realizing that you still have yourself. And that, I have learned, is enough to begin again. The first weeks after my quiet promise were the hardest. The silence from my family was a heavy cloak I wore every day, but beneath it, a subtle shift was taking place. I began to see that the very walls closing in around me were also pushing me outward, forcing me to find a new way to stand, to live, to survive. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was inching towards something else: independence. I took to wandering the little town where I'd lived for decades. The faces were familiar, but the air felt different, charged with possibilities I hadn't dared to notice before. I started by offering my help where I could. Mowing lawns for neighbors, cleaning houses, doing laundry for the elderly. Each small job brought in a few dollars, but more importantly, it brought me connection. The people I met welcomed me with smiles and stories, and for the first time in a long while I felt seen. There were days when my body ached and my spirit wavered, but I kept going, reminding myself that this was not charity, it was work. I was rebuilding my life brick by brick with my own hands. I learned to budget fiercely, stretching each dollar until it sang with possibility. I clipped coupons, shopped clearance racks, and cooked meals from whatever I could find in the pantry. The simple act of making a meal became a celebration of what I still had, not a reminder of what I had lost. Yet, the hardest part wasn't managing the bills or the loneliness, it was the absence of family. I longed for a call, a visit, a sign that I mattered still. But the silence stretched on, a chasm I wasn't sure I could cross. I thought about reaching out, but pride and pain held me back. Instead, I chose to build a life that didn't depend on their approval, even if my heart ached for their presence. One afternoon, while dusting shelves at the local thrift store, I overheard a conversation that caught my attention. A small business in town was looking for investors. It was a modest venture, a local bakery struggling to stay afloat. The idea planted a seed deep inside me. Could this be the chance to change my story? I spent nights poring over every detail I could find, weighing the risks and rewards. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of community, warmth, and renewal. I imagined myself not as a helpless elder, but as a woman with a stake in something real, something that could grow. I shared the idea with Mrs. Harper, whose faith in me was a steady flame. "May," she said, "sometimes the hardest step is believing you deserve to succeed. You do. You deserve it all." Her words gave me courage, but the doubt lingered. Was I too late? Too old? Too small to make a difference? Despite the fear, I found a way to gather what little savings I had and approached the bakery's owner. To my surprise, she welcomed me with open arms, grateful for any help she could get. The deal was humble, but it was mine. That small investment was the first real step toward reclaiming control over my life. As weeks turned into months, the bakery slowly began to thrive. My mornings filled with the scent of fresh bread and warm coffee, the chatter of customers, and the satisfaction of being part of something alive. I learned about inventory, marketing, customer service, skills I never thought I'd have. Each success, no matter how small, built my confidence. The distant echoes of family judgments faded as I found new voices cheering me on. Neighbors stopped by not just to buy bread, but to share stories, to invite me into their lives. I was no longer invisible. I was a part of the community fabric, woven with threads of resilience and hope. Still, the tension with my family remained. Invitations never came. Calls went unanswered. They saw me as someone who needed saving, but I was saving myself. I held on to the belief that one day, they might see me not as a burden, but as a person who had chosen to rise. One afternoon, my son's name appeared on my phone screen. My heart raced, hope and fear tangled in my chest. He apologized for the silence, for the distance. He said he'd been proud of me all along but didn't know how to reach out. That moment, fragile and tentative, was a crack in the wall between us. I told him about the bakery, about the life I was building. He listened, and for the first time in a long time we spoke like family again, not perfect but real. It was a beginning, a reminder that healing takes time, and sometimes it starts with the smallest gestures. Through it all, I held on to the quiet moments that nourished my soul. The morning sun warming my face, the laughter of children in the park, the feel of earth in my hands. These were the treasures I collected. Proof that life could be gentle even in hardship. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. A deep well of resilience born from necessity and hope. I learned that independence wasn't just about money or jobs. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my place in the world. As the bakery grew, so did my vision. I began dreaming of more than survival. I dreamed of thriving. Of a life where I wasn't defined by rejection but by the courage to rebuild. Each day I wrote down goals, plans, and ideas, turning my notebook into a map of possibilities. I knew the road ahead would still have bumps and setbacks, but I no longer feared them. I had learned that resilience isn't the absence of struggle, but the refusal to be defeated by it. And so with each sunrise I took another step forward. Sometimes small, sometimes bold, but always mine. I was no longer the woman waiting for rescue. I was May, a woman who had found her own way through the silence, the rejection and the doubt. The family that once turned away was still out there, but I was no longer waiting for their permission to live. I was creating a life that belonged to me, one day at a time, with hard work, hope, and a quiet, unshakable strength. The morning I stepped off the bus into the dusty streets of my hometown, a strange mix of nerves and determination settled deep within me. The place hadn't changed much. The same cracked sidewalks, the familiar storefronts, the scent of coffee and warm earth hanging in the air. But I was different. No longer the woman who had arrived with empty hands and a heavy heart. I came back carrying something far more valuable. Confidence born from hard-won success. The bakery had flourished beyond what I dared hope. Each loaf sold, each smile exchanged, was a testament to the journey I'd taken alone. Now, as I walked the streets where my children had grown, I wasn't the struggling mother they once dismissed. I was May, the woman who had rebuilt her life from the ground up, who had found strength in solitude and victory in resilience. Word of my return traveled fast. Neighbors nodded with recognition, some with awe. The woman they once saw as fragile now carried herself with a quiet grace that demanded respect. I wasn't sure if my family had heard yet, but I was ready for whatever came next. At my daughter's house I stood for a moment before knocking, heart pounding in my chest. When the door opened, I saw surprise flicker across her face, quickly replaced by something else, perhaps guilt or regret. We stared at each other, the years of silence thick between us. "I'm back," I said simply. She stepped aside, letting me in. The house was neat but lacked the warmth I remembered. I didn't ask for explanations or apologies. Instead, I let my presence speak for itself. A woman transformed, no longer in need but in command. That evening, as we sat around the table, I shared stories of the bakery, the people I'd met, the lessons I'd learned. I saw her eyes soften, the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion, but it was a start. My return wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting. It was about reclaiming my place with dignity intact. The rest of the family followed suit, some hesitant, some curious. My son visited with his children, shy at first, then opening up as they recognized the grandmother they had missed. My eldest called, voice trembling with emotion. The distance was still there, but it was shrinking. I made it clear from the start. I wasn't back to be a charity case or to relive old pains. I was here as an equal, a woman who had earned her place through sweat and resolve. That stance unsettled some, but it was necessary. Years of being overlooked had taught me that respect must be demanded before it can be given. One afternoon, as I walked through the garden I had planted behind my old home, my daughter joined me. We talked about the past, not to blame but to understand. She admitted her mistakes, the pride that had kept her away. I listened, offering forgiveness but holding firm boundaries. It was a delicate dance, but one I was willing to learn. The bakery's success became a bridge between us. Family members began to see me not just as their mother or grandmother, but as a woman with vision and strength. Invitations came for dinners, for gatherings, but I chose which to accept on my terms. I was rebuilding not just relationships but self-respect. At times the old wounds flared. Moments when the past threatened to pull me back into despair. But I stood firm, reminding myself that this was my story now. I had faced rejection and risen. I had been invisible and found visibility. I was no longer defined by their opinions but by my own truth. The community embraced me in ways my family had not. Friends I had made during those lonely months showed up to celebrate the bakery's milestones. Their cheers echoed louder than any family's silence ever had. I realized that family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand by you when the world turns away. One evening as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch of my old house, watching the shadows stretch across the land. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who stood on that porch rejected and weary, and the woman I had become. The journey had been long and hard, but it was mine. I had returned not just to reclaim a place in my family, but to reclaim myself. The woman who had once been overlooked was now seen, heard, and respected. And though the road ahead still held challenges, I faced them not as a victim, but as a victor. The hardest part had been over. Stepping back into the world that once turned its back on me and standing tall. My family had to reckon with the truth. I was no longer the woman they thought they knew. I was May, reborn through fire and grace. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The journey was far from over, but I was ready. The woman who left was gone, replaced by someone who had discovered the power of resilience, the strength of forgiveness, and the beauty of self-worth. The days that followed my return were a delicate balance between healing and holding firm. My family's reactions were a mix of surprise, guilt, and cautious admiration. I could see it in their eyes, the realization that the woman they had turned away was no longer the one who needed saving, but the one standing strong. My daughter, who had once closed her door, now invited me to share Sunday dinners. At first I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to bridge the gap entirely. But her invitation came with softness and I accepted, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. The house filled again with the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation, tentative but real. My son's visits grew more frequent, and with each one, the walls between us crumbled a little more. He apologized for the silence, for the years lost to pride and misunderstanding. I forgave him, not because forgetting was easy, but because holding on to bitterness would only weigh me down. Forgiveness became my gift, both to him and to myself. Yet, even as we rebuilt, I knew I had to keep my boundaries clear. Respect was the foundation of this new chapter, and I refused to let old patterns pull me back into being overlooked or dismissed. When conversations veered into blame or judgment, I gently but firmly redirected them. I was no longer the woman who bent to please. I was May, standing tall. The bakery's success became a symbol not just of my independence, but of the new dynamic with my family. They began to see me as a partner, not just a mother or grandmother. When I shared stories of the business, of the challenges and triumphs, they listened with genuine interest. It was as if the bakery had given them a new lens through which to see me. At community events, I was no longer just an elder in the crowd but a respected entrepreneur. Old friends and new neighbors came to celebrate the milestones, cheering me on with warmth and pride. Their support reminded me that family extends beyond bloodlines, encompassing those who choose to stand with you. There were moments when guilt surfaced in my family's eyes, a silent apology for the years they had turned away. I met those moments with grace, acknowledging the pain without dwelling on it. We shared stories of the past, not to reopen wounds, but to build understanding. It was a slow dance of reconciliation, marked by patience and hope. One afternoon, as I tended the garden behind my old home, my daughter joined me. We worked side by side in the soil, planting new life together. The act felt symbolic, a nurturing of both plants and our fractured relationship. We spoke honestly about mistakes and regrets, promising to do better not for perfection, but for connection. The quiet strength I had found during my darkest days became a beacon for my family. They saw me not just as the woman who had been rejected, but as one who had reclaimed her dignity and forged a new path. Their admiration was tinged with humility, a recognition of the resilience they had once overlooked. I also noticed a subtle shift within myself. The pain of rejection no longer defined me. It was a chapter in a larger story of growth and renewal. I learned to embrace vulnerability as a strength, allowing love and forgiveness to fill spaces once occupied by hurt. As the months passed, family gatherings became more frequent and genuine. Laughter returned to the dinner table, mingling with stories and plans for the future. While the scars of the past remained, they no longer controlled the narrative. Instead, we were writing a new story together, one of respect, understanding, and mutual support. I remained cautious, knowing that healing is rarely linear. There were setbacks, moments when old wounds bubbled to the surface, threatening to undo progress. But each time I reminded myself and my family that growth requires patience and grace. We were learning to listen, to hold space for each other's pain and hopes. The journey culminated in a balanced resolution where I felt truly seen and respected, both emotionally and financially. I no longer depended on anyone's approval to live fully. My success was mine, hard-earned and cherished. And while I welcomed my family's presence, I stood firm in the knowledge that my worth was not contingent on their acceptance. One evening, as I closed the bakery after a long day, I paused to reflect on how far I had come. The woman who had been turned away was now embraced by family and community alike. The quiet house where loneliness once lived now echoed with warmth and possibility. I realized that triumph over adversity is not about erasing pain, but about transforming it. It's about reclaiming your narrative, setting boundaries, and opening your heart to both forgiveness and growth. I had done all this step by step with courage and grace. The restoration of my self-worth was the greatest victory of all. It rippled through every relationship, every moment of my life. I was no longer the invisible woman on the porch but a force of resilience and love. And so with each new day I continued to nurture these bonds, mindful of the past but focused on the future. My family and I were not perfect, but we were healing together and apart, in ways that honored our shared history and individual journeys. Through it all, I held on to the truth that had carried me here. That dignity and respect are earned through strength, forgiveness, and the courage to keep moving forward. When I look back on the journey I've traveled, from the woman standing alone on that Texas porch to the one who returned home with a fire in her heart, I'm struck by how resilience and self-belief became my anchors. My name is May, and I want to share with you not just the story of my struggle, but the quiet power that carried me through and the hope I want to pass on to anyone who feels lost or forgotten. I was rejected by the family I loved most, left to navigate hardship on my own. At first, that pain felt like a wound that would never heal. But slowly, through small steps and steady determination, I learned that true wealth isn't counted in dollars or possessions. It's the strength we find within ourselves to rise again. Along the way, I discovered that independence doesn't mean walking alone. It means choosing who walks beside you and when. I rebuilt my life not just through work and business, but through forgiveness and boundaries. I reclaimed my voice and my dignity, understanding that respect is not given lightly but must be earned, often from those closest to us. My family's journey toward acceptance mirrored my own. We learned that love is complicated, that pride can blind us, and that healing requires patience and courage. I chose to forgive, not because forgetting was easy, but because carrying bitterness would only trap me in the past. Forgiveness opened the door to new beginnings, even if the path was uneven. I want to remind you, wherever you are in your own story, that it's never too late to choose yourself. No matter what doors have closed or what voices have silenced you, there is a well of strength waiting inside, waiting for you to tap into it. It may be quiet at first, a faint whisper, but it grows louder with each brave step forward. Sometimes the hardest part of life is realizing that those we expected to lean on may not be able to hold us. But that doesn't mean we are alone. Family can be redefined, communities can be built, and a new life can be nurtured from the ground up. I found joy in the simple rituals, the garden I planted, the bakery I helped grow, the friendships that blossomed along the way. These were the threads that wove a new tapestry from the frayed edges of my old life. And in that tapestry, I found a woman I had almost forgotten, the woman who refused to be broken. So if you're listening now, know this: your story matters. Your strength matters. And no matter how dark the night, dawn is coming. It's in your hands to rise, to rebuild, and to reclaim your life on your own terms. I am May, a woman who was once invisible, now seen. A woman who was once silent, now heard. And I walk forward with a heart full of hope, ready for whatever comes next. Wherever you are, whatever you face, remember you are enough. You are worthy. And your journey toward freedom and self-love can begin today.